Welcome to Blind Man and the Elephant. These are your hosts, Neeraj and Osho.
This is a podcast where two friends discuss a whole host of ideas that range from across the spectrum, from economics to culture, politics to sport. And we hope to bring our fresh perspective to things that are happening around us.
We live in times where there is an information overload. So, this is our attempt to make some sense of the noise.
You can listen to us on all major podcast streaming apps, including Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, and Anchor, as well as, of course, YouTube. You can check out all our links in the description along with this episode. Welcome to episode 10 of our podcast. Yes, we're 10 episodes strong. So if you haven't yet liked this episode or the previous 9 episodes, pause your video right here. Go to each and every video, go to each and every audio link and hit the like button. If you haven't yet subscribe to us. Then go to YouTube or go to Spotify or go to Apple Podcasts or go to Google Podcasts and like us and subscribe to us, because that's the only way we can grow. Thank you so much for doing that. In this episode, we continue our conversation with Tanisha, where we talk about how things have changed over the past decade for the queer community. How so many different kinds of politics have emerged around pride, around LGBT activism, and around just expressing your opinion as a member of the LGBT community. And finally, we talk about intimacy. We talk about how some people feel when they're so far apart, how they feel when they're always in each other's faces, and how emotions and love continue to prosper despite this pandemic. So let's jump right in.
I wanted to touch upon a point regarding you spoke about being queer and how it's always hard to be expected by society to start off in a quote unquote straight manner and then unlearn and relearn everything there is to do that. I'm sure that's super traumatic and tiring to most people, right? So I wanted to actually explore this issue and see what you think about how safe spaces for the LGBTQIA community have evolved over the last few years, especially in India, or even if you have a global perspective, because it seems like the conversation is there now, which probably wasn't there even as close to 10 years ago.
So I think that there seems to be an overall improvement in acceptance and representation. People do feel like the queer community is a little closer to being accepted in mainstream media. What I think they're missing though is that a lot of that is mostly extended to the upper caste communities. So I feel like when you're in the queer community, the closer you are to being able to conform to the, straight and cisgender expectations and norms in society, the easier it is for society to accept you. So if you are a gay person who still wants the traditional role of having like a monogamous partner and starting a family with them and living in your own house and maybe adopting kids or whatever, then I think that identity is a little easier to accept than, say, a gay person who says that they have no interest in monogamy. Similarly, I think in the trans community also there is a bit of a separation. So if you are a trans person who is open to legal and medical transitioning, then it is easier to be more accepted than the trans people who are not interested in any medical or legal transition. So I think a lot of it boils down to caste identity and religious standing in society, because that gives you a certain amount of social privilege, and along with it comes a lot of financial privilege as well. So if you have that going for you, then it is a little easier to be accepted as a queer person. But if you are Bahujan or Muslim or someone who is just very difficult for cis het society to put you in a little box, then life is considerably harder. Now, because things have become as digital as they have, I think a lot of people from the community have been able to create their own safe spaces, because even if they don't have physical access to people from their community, they have been able to reach out and find people online, either through dating apps or even just through something like Instagram. So that does provide a glimmer of hope to a lot of people in the community. But I feel like with the pandemic kicking in and things getting very, very restrictive for us in the outer world, it's harder to maintain that concept of safety and maintain that concept of being connected to people from the community, because it's no longer something that you can just step out and reach out and make a connection. You're very restricted to your online communication with these people, and a lot of people from queer and trans communities have had to move back into homes where they possibly live with abusive or hostile families who do not fully accept them. So it's a very strange time because we're finding safety online while simultaneously battling a lot of danger and potential violence right outside our homes or even inside our homes.
Yeah, I wonder how that's navigated and how then the online space becomes an even more active avenue for people from the community, right?
I think it's just very difficult to really explore what safety can mean to you on digital spaces, because it's not like digital spaces are magically devoid of, predatory people or people who are just not safe to you. So in order to find people who say are trans like you or who are queer like you have to some extent put your identity out there and make sure that your online profile demonstrates your identity enough for it to attract other people from the community and help you connect with more people. But along with that comes, the attention of people who are slightly more hateful and people who will try and negate your lived experience and say that you are not as queer as other people, or you are not as trans as other people, or you are pretending to be something you're not just for the attention. Like, this is all nonsense that we hear on a very regular basis when we put our identities out there. So it's very difficult to sort of stay sane knowing that the outside world is a mix of safety and danger for us, and also knowing that digital spaces are just exactly the same but amplified, because endless number of people can communicate and contact you in tiny periods of time, so it feels a lot louder.
But do you think this has changed, say, over the last 5 years, 7 years, 10 years? Because where I'm coming from is that I remember being in first year of college when the Supreme Court said that Section 377 is valid law and therefore criminal action against people from the homosexual community and generally the LGBT community is something which is okay. And this obviously came after a period where the Delhi High Court had said that, consenting adults need not be prosecuted against, blah, blah, blah. And then 4 years later, 5 years later, we see another judgment in the Supreme Court, which then puts a final lid on the matter and says there is no criminal action that is possible against consenting adults, no matter what their sexual preferences are. So, I mean, it has been a turbulent time for the queer community over the last 5, 10 years. I just want to know how it has been in terms of safe spaces, in terms of how accepting people have been. I understand that some communities, especially communities of privilege, are more accepting than others. But do you think there's been a change? And do you think maybe even pop culture has played some kind of role in it?
Yeah, there is change, but it's affecting people from the community so disproportionately that I feel like the cracks within the community are starting to widen a little bit. At least, like, again, when I was in college, I was very open about my identity, but I had very limited connections to the actual community. So I'm not sure if my perspective from back then is entirely accurate. But like, if we're talking about, say, just pride gatherings in Bombay, right, they seemed like a much smaller deal. It seemed like as in, it seemed like people would just decide the date, the venue, and all you had to do is be there. It didn't seem like a massively political issue or anything that could divide us at all. Last year, what happened at Pride was a lot of us from the community basically asked if the gathering for Pride will also be political, because the history of Pride is that we do get political. So we wanted to know if it would have anything to do with the way some of the current policies were affecting the queer community in India, and if we were allowed to say anything about it. And the people organizing the Pride march in Bombay had absolutely nothing to say and then took a very apolitical stance. What then happened was that we had a couple of people who came to Pride with their political banners and their posters, and they were chanting against specific policies by the government. And when the police inevitably intervened and said that they were going to arrest people who were raising awareness about Kashmir, the organizers threw one of our people under the bus. They gave the person's name to the police and helped them get arrested, stating clearly that Pride was not supposed to be political, it was just supposed to be a celebration. So even though it's very easy to look at, say, Bollywood and say that okay, there are more movies coming out now with gay characters, which is great, all of them being played by straight people, also great. But at the same time, there is so much political violence that is basically being targeted towards select facets of the queer and trans community, and we simultaneously have to deal with upper caste groups, specifically the cis gay men of Bombay, who think that because their identities are a little more widely accepted now and that the law isn't keeping them in any way, that the job is done. So there is this break now in the community of people from privileged backgrounds acting as though the job is done and we don't have any reason to protest or ruffle any feathers anymore, while the rest of us are wondering how we've sort of been left behind. So I feel like this conversation about things changing over the years or things having gotten better over the years is something that only really applies to the, Savarna creme de la creme of the queer community.
Thanks, Tanisha, for unpacking some of these concepts, right? Because as a person of privilege who doesn't have to think about these issues, you're right. Like you have this very reductive stance on, oh, there are these laws, there are these movies coming out, and yes, maybe now the conversation's out there, but it's at the end of the day a spectrum, right? There are always communities which would be better along that spectrum, and some which have not received the attention or the kind of support that they deserve. I think that's super super relevant, and thanks for bringing all this up, because at least for me this was very very informative. I just wanted to probably pull up a little bit and just ask, like, through your work, of course, or just in conversations, right? Like, how do you address these questions of sexuality? Like, how do you help someone understand who they are? How do you go about that process of connecting them to community and so on? Because I do understand that a lot of your work would encompass some of these questions.
So I don't particularly think that my work is helping people connect to community, at least not yet. I think the major objective of my writing is to first address the many ways in which the narratives with which we grew up and the political narratives especially that surround us right now are designed in a way that erase our existence. They are designed in a way to make us feel isolated, and they make us feel like afterthoughts. And what I'm aiming to do first is to undo the damage that language has done to so many people. I don't want to say things like male, female, or other, because that again implies that if you are not a cis man or a cis woman, that you are just some ambiguous group of undefined people. It's the little things like that that I'm trying to work on first, because I think building language to make sure that people can actually articulate how they identify themselves and what they're feeling and what their experiences have been like, that is the first step towards really allowing people to sit down and accept who they really are. I think it's very tricky to offer people a broken language and say, ha, now you try to explain to the entire world what your life is like. That's very hard to do. And I think because I have personally felt slightly betrayed by academic language as well as casual everyday language, that I'm trying to rebuild that from scratch and just provide people with the words they need to be able to express themselves, because at the end of the day, I will never know what it is like to be them. I will never know what it was like to live their lives or to have the struggles that they did. All I can do is make sure I'm doing a decent job and giving them the language they need so that they can get up and speak for themselves and make sure that other people are listening to them. So I think that is what my strategy with showcasing more stories on sex and sexuality really is, that people need to have the right tools first to be able to talk about themselves and to have the tools to understand what their loved ones are saying to them.
Yeah, you're right. I think to me too, that sounds like a very, very good starting point to start at, because yeah, from what I've experienced as well in terms of academic language and so on, it's so non-inclusive that just starting there and giving people that manner to articulate their thoughts, like, it just makes so much sense to me. I want to move on towards the idea of intimacy, right? So I want to know, especially since we've had a very, very tough year in the last, since COVID sort of took over. I want to know what you think about how people are navigating things like intimacy during the pandemic. How do you think it exists in different contexts? Like, if you're living with your partner, if you're living away from your partner, if you're single. I mean, a bunch of my friends were talking about how hard it is to use, say, Tinder or Hinge, or one of these dating apps during the pandemic, and things like that. So aside from, of course, the trauma that people faced in their homes and their unsafe spaces that they belong to, I just wanted to know about the intimacy angle of this all.
So, I'm actually very morbidly fascinated by what the pandemic has done to people's understanding of intimacy right now. Because, on the one hand, you have people who are feeling slightly isolated and separate from their partners or from whoever they have richer, more fulfilling relationships with, and they are starting to realize how much it means to them to be able to reach out and just touch a person and just have physical contact, even if it's not sexual in nature. So it's very interesting to see how so many of us are experiencing something that we call touch starvation, and we're just trying to figure out how to, maintain a certain level of self esteem and be able to love ourselves and accept ourselves, even if our skin has partially forgotten what it feels like to be held and hugged by another person. There is that end of the problem with the pandemic. There is also the other issue where there are people who are already living in with their partners or one of their partners, and they are now realizing that being cooped up together is also not ideal, and that you have to have a healthy balance of, personal space and personal interests, and you have to be a little more alone from time to time to better understand who you are as a person outside of those relationships. So I don't know. I don't know if this is a weird thing to say. I just think it's really interesting because the pandemic is sort of giving a lot of people a bit of a reality check. It suddenly feels like you can't really take aspects of your personal mental health for granted anymore. You can't take aspects of your relationships for granted anymore. You have to sort of really sit down with your thoughts and think about what intimacy, self love, and self care and good mental health, and you have to understand what all of these things mean to you and to your partners, and really learn how to, show up for them. It's also interesting to see how so many people are, sending their loved ones food or using Swiggy just to call for groceries or chai and send it to their partners because that's the least they can do. Netflix started that whole, I think, party extension. I think that was last year, where people could just watch things online together, even if it was on separate devices. So I think everyone is just really, stuck with their thoughts and now really thinking about what it means to have a connection with another person and to navigate those connections in a way that isn't just a mere distraction from reality, but is an actual authentic way to bond with another person. I think that's really cool.
It's going to be interesting to see how people emerge out of this. I mean, we talk about this in every other context, but I think with intimacy, it's going to be that much more important, right? Because you were literally told to stay away from every other human being unless you were living with them. So I want to see how when people sort of crawl out of their burrows, I want to see how they behave differently or whether they just return back to how they were before.
Yeah, I'm really waiting to see that as well, honestly. And I think it's also affected the way a lot of people would normally see sex and sexuality. I generally think that before the pandemic, a lot of us would still either take it for granted or make a slight mockery of it, right? So if we had some friends who were a little more sexually active or had more sexual partners than the rest of us, there would be this underlying joke or some kind of, there would be some response to it as though that wasn't regular human behavior, because we tend to do this with people who are more sexually active. But now with the pandemic in place, I think everyone suddenly realizes how nice it is to just be in the company of other people, whether it's sexual or not. For me personally, my like the nature of my friendships have changed so much, because I have suddenly started having more intense conversations with friends, because whenever we are available to catch up with each other, we just really want to sit down and catch up and know how the other person has been feeling, because we know that we are not sure of when we'll actually see each other in person anymore. So even though it's just a virtual interaction, there's so much more depth to it now. I have friends who insist on sending videos or voice notes instead of texts, because they just really want to hear my voice and let me hear theirs. um, yeah, so I think it's really going to change a lot of our communication styles as well, not just intimacy and relationships, but even our basic ability to show up in a friendship or a relationship or even a professional transaction. And yeah, all of that is likely to change now because of how the pandemic has pressured us into evolving with it.
I was also wondering, since we were on the topic of, virtual conversations and that kind of thing, like, I would imagine that the last year has shown even companies and, tech giants or whatever to think about these issues of intimacy and distance and how people need virtual connections and so on. Like, do you know of, through your work or research, if there are companies that are working on, say, better and more affordable AI, VR technology to help make people feel like they're actually closer to people that they want to get intimate with? Is that something that you've come across?
Well, sort of. I think I've noticed that a lot of dating apps have started video call options, I think, because they're trying to give people that option of, not feeling like they're waiting endlessly to have their first date and they can just do it virtually. But that's about all that I know of. On another subject, when we're talking about tech companies really paying attention to how personal intimacy is affected, I do know that there were some researchers looking into how major a role eye contact plays in communication as well, and they were realizing that it's really difficult to conduct presentations or have important meetings over Zoom or even just over a phone call, because a lot of people need to have that eye contact with their colleagues or with their clients to really be able to read the room. And losing that connection to the people that you're speaking to and not being able to gauge how they're responding to the information you're presenting to them has also affected people's confidence in the workplace, and it's affecting their, basically causing them a lot of anxiety. So I'm pretty sure that that's something that would then affect personal relationships as well, right? You're stuck with partners and close friends in other countries or in other time zones, you can't see them, everything is just a digital conversation right now. So it does bring up a lot of insecurities, because you don't have that direct comfort of knowing if you and the other person are entirely on the same page, and you're sort of just left wondering if that connection still exists or if this is just something you're biding time with as you both try to kill the lockdown. Like, I'm sure there are people who are battling those thoughts, because it's so difficult to really read another human being on texts alone.
Thank you for listening to part 2 of our conversation with Tanisha. Part 3 coming up really soon. Hit like, hit subscribe, share it with everyone. Thank you.